As we're reviewing here with the tissues, um, things you do need to be able to do. You need to be able to identify the different tissue slides that we looked at. So you should be able to look at the slide and tell me that that's simple squamous epithelium, or that's simple cuboidal, or simple columnar, or pseudostratified, or what have you. So make sure that you can identify those epithelial tissues. Make sure that you can identify those different types of connective tissue proper. You don't need to be able to identify any of the other connective tissues like bone or blood or cartilage at this point. You don't need to be able to identify muscle or neural tissue, but you do need to identify those different types of connective tissue proper. So you should be able to tell me that that's areolar tissue, or that's reticular or adipose tissue. Those are all fairly easy to distinguish. I don't think you'll have any problems with that. That being said, with tissues, you also need to be very careful about. So remember that you have 4 primary classes of tissue, those being epithelial, and muscular tissue. Don't confuse your classes of connective tissue proper, bone, cartilage, and blood, 4 types of primary tissues. So 4 primary tissue classes. Don't confuse those with types of connective tissue, and don't confuse your other thing either. So muscle is its own tissue; it's not a type of connective tissue, and this sort of thing. Make sure that you can classify those, because there are a couple on there that are like, which of these is not a primary tissue class, or which of these is not a class of connective tissue. So that make sure you can distinguish that as well. Remember that a tissue is a group of cells with similar functions coming from a similar place in the embryo. So your tissue definitions there. Other definitions that we talked about in histology, things like atrophy. You should know what atrophy means. You should know what necrosis means. Confuse necrosis with apoptosis. Remember that apoptosis is programmed cellular death. Necrosis is pathological death of tissue. But apoptosis is programmed cellular death that's built into the DNA. It's what's supposed to happen. Let's see, other things that we need here. As we've discussed, the epidermis is stratified squamous epithelium. The dermis is connective tissue proper. One thing that I failed to mention earlier as we review this is that progress that's made in terms of transcription and translation. Translation. So translation takes place at the ribosomes, making proteins for that messenger RNA code. That's translation. Make sure that you've got that idea as well. DNA, RNA, protein, transcription, translation. Let's see. Goblet cells. Unicellular exocrine glands. Okay. The last thing that I'll talk about in this section of the review You do need to go back and look at the parts of cell theory. Right, cell theory, the smallest unit of life is a cell. None of the pieces inside the cell are alive by themselves. Cells only come from other cells. All cells are very fundamentally on this similar. There aren't unique special cells that are one-offs. All cells are fundamentally similar, which is why we can kind of look at this generic cell as we go through this. So this is where I'm going to stop this part, and this part's shorter than the others. And when I come back for part 4, we're going to look mostly at the skin and sort of tie everything up.